Rolling.
Audio rolling as well?
Have you got the click, Jazz?
Rolling.
Okay.
You ready, Jack?
No.
Either way, I'm still going to start. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another session of The Playhouse. You know, in The Playhouse, we've had a couple of OGs, people who've been in the industry for quite a while. But I can honestly say that we have not had anybody who has been in the industry as long as the person that you are seeing in front of your screens. If you are in the Kenya music or even entertainment industry, you stand on his shoulders. He has paved the way for you to be doing what you are doing. So even before this interview begins, I'd like to just honor the man right now. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, put your hands together for none other than Jack Odongo.
Are you quite done?
I enjoy doing intros and my own sound effects.
It seems.
Normally I start the interview by asking people to tell us when they first fell in love with music. But for you, I'm going to start it differently. I'm going to start it by saying thank you for the work that you have done for the Kenyan, the African music industry. A lot of people, especially the new people watching, may not per se know you. They know your son now more than you, which is very weird. But by the end of this, they're going to be standing and they're going to be honoring you. So in advance, I want to honor you and just say thank you for the work that you have done for us. Okay, let's get straight into it now. Mr. Jack. Can I call you Jack Odongo?
Just call me Jack.
Just call you Jack, yeah? Okay, Mr. Jack. When did you fall in love with music?
That is a very interesting question because before you came, I was going back to where did all of this start. My first introduction to music wasn't necessarily a falling in love. I'd say it was more or less an evolution. My late parents, particularly my late father, was a fan of classical music. And as we grew up as little kids, he would blast Beethoven, Mozart, all these symphonies and orchestras and things like that until the tunes became a part of us. And somewhere in the early primary school years, he just said, I'm getting a piano, you're all taking piano lessons. And that was it. That was my first entree into music, a whole series of piano lessons for a few years. And I wouldn't really say that I could pinpoint a time that I first fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. It just became a part of my thinking.
Okay, can we get some context and background? So first and foremost, can I ask what year this is? What year were you born? Just so that people watching this in 50 years can understand what the scene looked like then.
I was going to interview you and say, make a guess.
Let me see. 50?
December 57.
Oh, 57. Mm. Oh, nice. And how many are you in the family?
You mean my original family?
Yes, the original family.
3 sisters and myself.
Okay.
Of which I am a twin, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah, there was an older sister, a younger sister, and then my twin sister and I.
Oh.
Not identical and very, very different in personalities.
Okay, so this piano is coming into your life around when?
Early to mid 60s. I must have been about 6 years old or 7 or thereabouts.
Okay, paint us a picture. You know, right now when we say I was listening to Beethoven, instantly people are like, oh, you're listening on the internet. What are you listening to? How is the music scene then?
Oh, those days there weren't even cassettes. They were discs, records. I don't know what you guys call them now. You have EPs out there now.
Vinyls.
Yes, you're an old dog. Yes, they were all vinyl records. You turn it over, play side 1, play side 2, playing over percussors of what we call stereo systems now, gramophone records with single speakers. Stereo didn't really exist at that time, at least in this country. Mm-hmm. But the sound was good.
Okay, so your introduction was to classical music?
Classical music, yes.
Can you give us examples of people you're listening to? Beethoven, I heard you say Beethoven.
Yeah, Mozart, Beethoven, the orchestral and the piano pieces and things like that. And also, I should say, the musical introduction also included what was on the radio at the time, which was very British influenced. The then KBC was sort of copying the approach and the format of BBC. And so the other introduction to music was what would be on the radio. There'd be the Breakfast Club music, there'd be sundowner music, there'd be lunchtime music, which was semi-classical and semi-orchestral, and there was the early pop music that was coming in from especially the UK. Music by the Beatles, Tom Jones, and artists like that.
So, oh man, this is your primary days now that we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, where did you go to primary school?
A school on Parklands Road, it's now called. The school's called Hospital Hill School. I think it's still called Hospital Hill School.
Okay, Hospital Hill has been there for that long.
Yes, probably longer.
And I really like what you've talked about in terms of radio. This is the independence time that we're talking about?
Yes, when did we get independence? We got independence in 63, yes.
Yeah.
So it was immediate post-independence period, going into the 60s.
Okay, so it's Kenyans presenting on the radio. The British now have sort of transitioned.
I do believe there must have, yes, in fact, there used to be a show, The Breakfast Club, with a guy, I remember, wish you a very, very, very good morning, and Hamjambo, Peter Clare, a guy called Peter Clare. He was British, but there were also Kenyans in the radio at the time. It must have been, I'm not really conscious of how many British people may still have been there. But yes, there were Kenyans.
So you had two options when it comes to listening to music when you were in primary. You had one radio station.
Yes, essentially.
Which is KBC. And then you've got your vinyls at home. Phonos. Yes. Are they called phonos? P-H-O-N-O.
Yes, phonogram records is where the idea came from.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so you go to school, you start playing piano when you're around how old? 6?
Yes, 6, 7, 8. And I should say this, speaking about music, American music had also slowly started coming in. There were early artists, I'll remember their names, from movies, like The Sound of Music and the South Pacific and things like that, and some American pop music that was starting to come in the mid to late 60s in my awareness. Sorry, I digressed from your question.
No. By the way, this is the Playhouse. You're allowed to digress into all sorts of places and go, because I'm trying to extract as much from you. How was the TV landscape at the time?
Black and white.
And it's just VOK.
Yes, it was VOK. At that time, it was called KBC, Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. The naming to KBC now came way after it had been turned into the Voice of Kenya. It was KBC, then it became VOK, and now it's back to KBC.
Oh, again. I didn't know that. I always thought it started as VOK.
No, it started as KBC. For a very short, I don't remember the period of time before VOK. In fact, I remember some aunties joking, what's this VOK thing?
Yeah. Okay, so let's continue with this story. So you start, you join music through the piano.
Through the piano.
And do you fall in love with it? Is it something that you enjoy doing?
I did. I used to hate the fact, though, when we were very young, that we couldn't go out and play until we had practiced for the next piano lesson, That was a down part of it, but I really enjoyed the piano. I really did like it. I did.
Okay, so where does the story go? Because first of all, when we're talking about the primary system, this is not KCPE. KCPE does not exist.
No, they had, what did they call it? CPE, Certificate of Primary Exams, which you did at the end of Standard 7. Those days, primary went up to Standard 7. Then there was 4 years of lower high school and 2 years of upper high school, because high school was Form 1 to Form 6 at the time. So there was the CPE in Standard 7, the school certificate in Form 4, and the highest school certificate in Form 6.
And music was something that you could study in school?
Music was not seriously looked at, but I remember in primary school and up to Form 2, music was one of the subjects that people were exposed to. Maybe not intensely, by way of songs or music appreciation and things like that. And having said that, I don't think that was far and wide across the nation, because obviously the facilities perhaps were not fully available far and wide.
Okay. I've not heard you mention that you were listening to any African musicians at this time. Very
interesting. There was what I used to hear grown-ups calling Congolese music. And that was the African music we were exposed to, apart from maybe hearing the national anthem in Swahili and a few other things. I have to be honest to say that my attention to African music in my childhood years wasn't as strong as it may have been later on, perhaps because of the exposure I had at the time.
Okay, in terms of, I know you as somebody who has built a lot of worship teams within Kenya. Is the household has any affiliation to Christianity at this time?
When you say household,
home, where you're living now.
That's the bottom line of everything. That's the foundation of everything.
Okay.
Yes. My exposure to Christianity was obviously as a child. You all go to church, All Saints Cathedral, that kind of thing. And in high school and in primary school, there's the school assembly, there's the school chapel. But my conversion into Christianity happened as an adult, into being really serious, born again.
Okay. Continue with this story. Thank you so much for that amazing landscape. I mean, a flashback of so I'm understanding how the landscape looks at this time. It's important for us to do that. So as the story progresses, we can understand the evolution.
Yes.
So what happens? Where does the story go from primary go on?
Yes, I'll flash back again. Some of my early memories of music in Swahili was, I don't remember if it was the Bata Shoeshine Boys or who it was, but there were songs that were patriotic, like Harambe, Harambe, Tuimbe, Pamoja, Those were the kind of songs. And the twist was a very popular dance style that came from the US. And I watched grown-ups dancing the twist to that. So very interesting. But that was interesting. It was a patriotic song, and I imagine that was the tenor of national thinking in the early and mid-60s. So there were those kind of groups, the Bata Shoeshine Boys, and I just can't remember the other groups at this time. And like I said earlier, a lot of Congolese music.
So when you say the Bata Shoeshine Boys...
That was a band probably sponsored by Bata.
Whoa.
Probably.
So they were actually, of course they probably did adverts for Bata, but they were actually a band themselves.
It was a band, and I'm sure there were quite a few others at that time that I may not have been aware of. And there were Congolese artists like Franklin Bokaka and Luambo Luanzu Makiadi, I think he's called Franco, the late Franco. Laroche, who later named himself Tabule, because a lot of adults used to like that kind of music, in my observation at that time.
Also very important for us to point out, Kenyatta was the president.
Kenyatta,
and we're not talking about Kenyatta who's...
No, Kenyatta the dad.
The father was the president.
He was the well, yes, for 1 year he was prime minister because we were following the British system of government. But then in 1964, Kenya was declared a republic, and the leader of a republic was a president. And that's when he assumed the title president. But before that, he was the prime minister for, I believe, about 1 year.
Who was the prime minister before him?
He was the first prime minister. Before that, there were governors.
Yes.
Malcolm MacDonald was the last one, if I remember correctly.
Man. KBC needs to open up our archives and just let us
I'm sure there's some incredible stuff there.
Okay, let's go on with you. Where does your musical journey continue to?
My musical journey continued in primary school because somewhere in the later years, there was always an assembly on Friday, and I was asked to play the national anthem, which I had learned from music, but later memorized, play the national anthem on piano. And of course, in primary school, there was always a singing class, a music class, and little plays that people would do. And in that period of time, I started becoming more aware of what, let's call it generally speaking, pop music and other genres. I was pretty young, and a whole lot of other styles of music that I didn't understand them, because my late mom really liked music. She loved the musicals, like The Sound of Music, you know, and the South Pacific, and all these American Broadway style films that started coming out with a whole eclectic mix of music. And some friends of ours started listening to jazz, you know, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and things like that, you know, these big brass bands. And so that kind of genre started getting into my subconsciousness by that time. I have to say, I think I was extremely fortunate to have been exposed very early in life to all of that. So by the time I was finishing high school,
Where did you go to high school?
I'm sorry, primary school. I went to Lenana School. Yeah,
The Duke.
The Duke of York. Yeah, I think that name had changed earlier, before I got there. It was named after a British Duke, just like Nairobi School was named after the Prince of Wales, you know. That's how they did it.
Man, so you finish primary and go to Lenana.
Lenana School.
Okay, how does and what happens there?
Boarding school, very interesting. Can we pause?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh well, just keep it running. Keep it running.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, it's too many years ago.
Yeah, it's like a while back.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say,
Okay.
flashback. In my primary years, our first piano teacher, we all went, was this German lady who I honor, the late Margareta Davis. And I believe she trained quite a few people who might still remember her. She was a general. She knew when you were faking it. She knew when you had practiced. But she'd take us to the Kenyan music festivals, you know, for piano solos, duets, trios, whatever. And we always came first, second, or third. And I realized later she was that good. And it was her regimen, her discipline, and her, at that time, seemingly ruthless, you know, sticking to process. That was the foundation, the first foundation, I call it, of my musical journey. And moving into high school, coming back to your earlier question, Lenana School was a very interesting mix of expatriate and the first Kenyan teachers. And so there was still a lot of that British influence in some of the things we had to do, in some of the drills we had to go through, parading in assembly and all that kind of thing, which in hindsight was very, very good for discipline. Lenana was, and I believe still is, divided into different houses where boarding students would go. There were many activities, extracurricular, from sports to debating to, you know, different things, science, photography, and of course music. You don't have to guess where.
You went straight to music.
You know, music. There was music. The beginnings of a school orchestra, and there was school band, you know, which was great because, you know, we're starting to get into all kinds of music. You're a teenager, right? And you're listening to a lot of R&B, you know, the Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, the Supremes. You're listening to a lot of British rock music, American rock and pop music, and the musicals, you know, the more formal musical movies and things at that time. That was our landscape. You know, we had various versions of the school band, the school orchestra. Most people joined the orchestra because they wanted to visit the girls' school orchestras as well, you know. I joined because I liked the music. You know, and that was my second.
And again, you're still playing the piano in school.
Still playing the piano and the organ. There was a Hammond organ in the chapel, a real Hammond organ. Those of you out there who are keyboard players who might appreciate that. It was incredible. You know, 2 manuals, pedals, the whole works. And we had this music teacher, a British guy who was also a, you know, but he was a conductor of the Nairobi Orchestra. He was at that level. He was incredible, and he was a choir trainer. I joined the choir, and that was an introduction to different forms of choral music, church music, because I would play the organ in chapel as well, and different types of harmony, different approaches to looking at music beyond just the melody, beyond just the beat, you know. You get to understand that rhythm is not about the drums. It's a pulse that is in you, and you express it in different ways, you know, whether you're rapping, playing the drums, playing the keyboard, or whatever it is. So rhythm is something that exists in you, whatever form or style of music, you know, you're doing. And it was interesting to be exposed to that approach to music. This music teacher would organize joint choirs with 5 or 6 schools and the Nairobi Orchestra, you know, do things at All Saints with a huge, it was huge. I mean, he would do things like that. It was quite something. He left very early to go to wherever he went.
Yeah.
But he was quite a stickler for perfection and for punctuality and, you know, all those kind of things.
Brought some good discipline.
Yeah, so it was a yin and yang. I was involved in that. I was involved in the school band trying to, you know, belt out heavy, crazy, you know, rock songs and, you know, things like that. It was interesting. It was great.
Did you form any band in school?
Yes, we formed the junior band with people you might not know, and eventually Ayuba Ogata was in Lenana. We were in the same year. And you know, for 4 years we were, you know, together. We wrote some of our first songs together, in fact. So he was a member of that group.
What? So who else was in this group of yours?
Well, some of those guys have passed. Gordon Ominde, who was 2 years ahead of me, we were in the same primary. He was this incredible guitarist, and eventually later on he formed a group called Black Savage that I joined, you know, because I knew him. And you know, there were guys like Fred Ayugi, Barak Achieng, who I think is probably still in England. In Lenana School were also guys who formed rival groups to Black Savage, like Noel. Now he calls himself Noel Nafwa. He was an incredible drummer. I don't think he does that anymore. I'm trying to remember names, but you know, there were quite a few people. We, in high school also, because of the teachers, got to mix with people in different schools, you know. Suzanne Kibukosia was in Limuru Girls, and she had a whole group of, she wrote the most incredible songs. They did choreography, so we collaborated a lot on stuff that we would do because our teachers brought the schools together in music, you know.
So now, high school. Where did you go to high school?
Limuru Girls.
Limuru Girls.
And then I moved to Musangari.
Okay, continue the journey.
Okay, so I start my music lessons. I'm late. I play by ear better than I hated sight reading, but I did the whole thing. I did the whole learning classical music, blah blah blah. Go to high school, start composing. We started a band in Form 2 called Syncopated Soul.
Anybody that we know who would be on that band?
Well, Makena Mweraria, who bought African Heritage.
Yes.
Ooh. God, I'm trying to think who else. And then we teamed up with a group from Lenana called Velvet Motion. So we do gigs together.
Wow.
There were quite a few people around there.
Okay, I've heard you mention your connection with Ayub, and of course you're going to talk about how the journey continues later.
Yeah.
But this is where the two of you...
We met in Lenana School.
Same year?
Same year. We were in the same year for 4 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, and we exchanged a lot, we co-wrote quite a lot of songs. Oh God, it was fun.
So at this time now in high school is when you begin composing your own songs for the first time?
For the first time. Serious, well, I don't know if it's serious, but yeah, composing my own songs for the very first time.
Not recording them in studios, but then at least just composing and performing in different school activities.
And some of them just between friends and ourselves, because, you know, what forum did you have, you know?
Okay. Outside school, anything interesting about the landscape, the arts, the theatre that you were involved in?
Not really. If there were any forays outside, it would be in the context of bands like Black Savage and the like, that we'd go out and do gigs here and there. At that time, let's call it pop music, was not really an art that was looked upon well by the society. Music was associated with clubs and drinking and, you know, that whole thing. So even being involved in that put me in a lot of trouble. Not the drinking, I never did drink.
Yes.
But in the...
in the music culture of the pop.
Yes, it was associated with a lot of negativity. So God help any child who said they want to grow up to be a pop musician.
how was then the disco or the club landscape? Where were people going?
That's the thing. I didn't really know much about it because first of all, God help you if you think of going into a disco.
Oh, your parents were a bit...
yes, yes, very, very strict. But there was a club scene. There was a disco scene, there was a pop scene, everything was happening. Every culture has what people call a counterculture.
Yes.
And it was vibrant. I mean, there were groups, Kenyan groups who came up like the Slim Ali and the Hodi Boys and the Cavaliers and the Maroon Commandos from the army. And groups like that who were busy doing a whole lot of stuff. Kelly Brown, he called himself Kelly the Bushman, Steel Buter, all these people were out there very, very busy doing stuff.
There was actually a very
vibrant scene. I was too young to, be an active part of it. It is only in the later years that, I sort of got involved in that.
Yeah, I just learned about the Cavaliers because of that Tahamaki song, Dunia Ina Mambo.
That was a big hit. I don't think they made any money out of it. It was a huge, huge hit. Very philosophical song when you think about it in some aspects.
Yes.
Kuwa mwanangu jione dunia ina mambo yao siku yasikiza, sasa mimi najuta kweli najionea dunia ina mambo. Walinambia kijana jihadhari na walimwengu, hao walimwengu si wazuri kwako kijana, yao siku yasikiza, sasa mimi najuta kweli najionea dunia ina mambo.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on with this story. So, anything else interesting, or high school, or you finish high school and then go?
Yeah, in high school you get to Form 4 and then you tremble wondering if you'll be admitted into what they call A-levels. So I got back into Lenana School. My grades were average, but I got back on the strength of the fact that you're going to be involved in music, playing in chapel and all those kind of things. I said, of course, yeah, definitely, So I got in there and...
So it was almost like an honor to go back and do A-levels?
Yes-ish, no-ish,
okay.
Yes. A lot of people, for various reasons, unfortunately had to stop, after Form 4. And it was difficult because vocational training wasn't necessarily a huge thing like it is now. You can go in and do IT, things like that. It wasn't that big at that time.
And what are you thinking that you want to do in life at this time? Are you
music. By that time, music. My main subject in A-levels was economics, because, the choices that were there. But music, and in my A-levels, Form 5 and 6 at the time, the US Peace Corps over those years had been sending out volunteers, teachers, workers, aid, whatever. And one such volunteer happened to be a teacher sent to Lenana School, a lady called Carol Phillips. I will never forget her. She was first violin, first soprano, organist, pianist, this kind of, and she was in her 20s, I believe. It's like, oh my God. And she really picked up on some of us, and said, you guys, you don't know what you've got. That was the first time somebody started saying, you are all so musical. She recognized in me lots of abilities that I would never have, which I took for granted, And she inspired a lot of us to, she'd take us to watch some of her colleagues and, listen to American bluegrass and pop and rock and classical music. And, it was an incredible time because she really pushed people who were interested in music at the time. Now her colleague used to teach in Limuru Girls' School. And one day she came over to Lenana and started playing the piano, and I just went crazy. I said, what are you doing? This is what I'm hearing. And she was a Berkeley graduate.
Ooh.
I said, where did you learn? She said, Berkeley. I went, what is Berkeley? That is the day I went. I said, even if I die, I want to go to Berkeley.
That is so...
I never did. Opportunities.
Yeah.
That's a whole other story.
No, we'll get there. I have to ask this. Because you've talked about how affirming your gift, and also you've talked about that you wanted to do in music. I know you, and I've seen how you operate around your sons. You're very affirming of them in terms of, you want to be a musician, you want to be drummer, go and do it. Was that the same with you?
No, they were happy. They were happy getting us started, like I had mentioned. But I guess my predilection to moving into more contemporary pop type music started ringing bells. At that time, we were staying now with our mom, ringing, alarm bells. And she said, "You're not going to be like ABC or DEF. You're just going to study whatever, Which is, that's just the way it was.
Yes.
And going to Berkeley, after my high school, going to America in those days was like going to the moon. There's a song from an old musical which says, to dream the impossible dream, and that's what it was, And so, and getting Nairobi and Kenyatta College and Nairobi were the only real universities at that time. So the race to get into university was a huge deal. I didn't get admitted to Nairobi University. And so you pursue options. And at that time, this is the late 70s, India was a huge option for many Kenyans because A, it was cheap, B, it was reachable. It was a Commonwealth country, so the visa issue wasn't a big deal. So I applied, because what do? Do you want to be a pop musician or do you want to go to university? Kind of,
Yeah.
And I do understand the parental anxiety. The associations were not good. And so, look, do something decent. So I ended up in India.
So finish A-levels and whoop, off to India.
Yeah.
First time out of the country?
No. We had traveled as a family, a little bit before that.
And okay. During your travels, had you seen anything, had you gone to other African countries?
Interesting.
Where had you traveled to?
No, actually to England.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did going to England do for you?
Well, we were very young. We were exposed to a new culture, a new race. But it was not so unfamiliar because Kenya was so strongly influenced by the British culture at the time. My late father was going to do a doctoral degree, and so we all went there for some time just to. So
so when you talk about sometimes you moved there a year or more,
at that
or just
time,
a holiday.
At that time, it was about 8 or 9 months.
Okay, and so did you go to school at that time?
Yeah, for a term. Very interesting. But it was not alien to me in that a lot of the idioms, a lot of the songs, a lot of the folklore was familiar because I had been exposed to that, you see.
Of British culture had really penetrated into Kenya.
It had really penetrated into parts of Kenya, especially the capital at that time.
But going into a country were you one of the only blacks in that school?
Actually, we were. My sisters and I were the only Africans in the school at the time.
So what did that do for you?
Well,
were you still doing music at this time, or were you too young?
I was in primary school, standard 5 or 6, I can't remember where I was. But it was strange getting used to everyone being white and not black. But after a while, I think kids have a way of assimilating. I didn't see that I was the odd one out because I couldn't look at myself.
Yes.
We made friends and just did life.
Okay. So now you finish A-levels and then you go to India.
Yeah.
And you're going to study
economics.
Go on with that story.
India was quite an experience.